The United States has the highest prison and jail population in the world. As of 2020, there are around 2.3 million people incarcerated in the United States. According to a 2011 study by Pew Center, 43% of inmates will return to jail following their release. This means that if all of the current inmates were to be released today, around 989,000 would most likely return to prison at some point. Everyone makes mistakes, and some are certainly worse than others, but it is a disservice to the public, both economically and socially, that our primary means of rehabilitation doesn't work almost 50% of the time. As American citizens, we should be outraged that so many people are failed, prisoners and victims alike, by our prison system. The United States should shift its incarceration policies to resemble those that they have in place in Norway. In this speech, I will discuss the United States prison system and the problems associated with it. Then I will describe some opposing opinions to the system in place in Norway, which is the system that I think we should emulate. And finally, I will explain the policy that I think the United States should adopt and what you as a citizen can do to help. You may wonder why you should listen to me on this subject. I have never been to jail, nor has anyone in my family. The first reason I think I merit your attention is that I've done my research. All the information that I convey today is factual. The second and more personal reason is that my dad, at the beginning of his law career, worked as a federal public defender and experienced firsthand the unconscionable treatment of the incarcerated. He has also worked with the Innocence Project, and his work recently led to the outright case dismissal of a man imprisoned for life for $100 theft that he was later found to have not stolen. Upon release, the man had no support structure in place and no plans for his future. The story of this man is the story of many who are forced to serve severe prison sentences and released without guidance. Through my dad and my research, I have grown to understand the profound inhumanity and unnecessary human and economic cost of the current state of incarceration in the United States. It could be otherwise, and is otherwise in Norway. The Norwegian system has much more lenient prison sentences in general, and for the most horrific crimes impose a maximum sentence of 21 years. The exception to the 21-year sentence is if a prisoner is deemed unsafe to re-enter society. Norway has significantly more humane living facilities with a one prisoner to a cell policy, a separation of low and high risk prisoners, relaxed security on prisoners who are seen as not risky, easy access to job training and education, and finally, easily accessible and comprehensive support systems for prisoners after they have been released. With all of these advances, the country of Norway has experienced far less crime and far more employment among the formerly incarcerated. With that background information in mind, let's turn our attention to the current correctional system in place in the United States and how they're failing. The concept of imprisonment as a form of criminal punishment became popular around the American Revolution, with the first prison in America being founded by Pennsylvania Quakers in 1790. They created this prison with the belief that this form of punishment was less cruel than the dungeons and jails of the time. They wanted prisoners to read scriptures and repent as a means of rehabilitation. After the Civil War, the concepts of parole and indeterminate sentencing and probation were introduced. These developments were widely accepted and are still in place today. Today in America, our prison policies are focused far more on punishment than they are on rehabilitation. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the average sentence given out to a prisoner is 2.6 years, and of this sentence, they are expected to serve at least 1.3 years prior to release. In addition, in the United States, solitary confinement is also a standard form of punishment. While in prison, it can be very challenging for inmates to find self-improvement programs such as job training and education. Prisons are overcrowded and security is incredibly tight, even amongst inmates deemed low risk, and prisoners have limited access to the most basic activities. Our prison system often subjects incarcerated U.S. citizens to acts of extreme violence. These abuses include verbal attacks, physical attacks, sexual assault, and in many cases, death. Even more horrific is that much of the violence that prisoners are subjected to comes at the hand of prison guards, whose primary job is to keep inmates safe. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, Around 35% of male and 24% of female prisoners will experience physical violence while serving their time. In addition, there have been many reports of male and female prisoners being sexually abused or raped. And in the case of female prisoners, these sexual assaults will often be perpetrated by prison staff. After completing a prison sentence, the struggles of the incarcerated are far from over. Convicted felons in many cases leave prison with limited to no finances and often lack support. Although they are minimally monitored with the overburdened parole and probation system, they are not provided with nearly enough structure and support to succeed. Those most likely to successfully reintegrate into society are those who have the best support structures in place. With 43% of people released from jail expected to return, it is obvious that we are not providing these people with the necessary support. This high rate of recidivism proves that our prison system is failing to reform people while in prison and failing to provide the structure to successfully reintegrate former prisoners back into society. The economic and social costs of our failures are exorbitant. According to the Marshall Project, the United States spends $80 billion annually on prisons. Now that we have touched upon prison policy in the United States, let's consider some of the policies of the Norwegian system and some of the counter arguments against the Norwegian system. The first criticism one hears about the Norwegian system is that the sentences are too lenient. The maximum sentence that anyone in Norway can receive is 21 years. This would seem shocking to some in the United States, where life sentences are common. The Norwegian caveat is that if the person has served their time and yet remains a danger to society, they will be evaluated and remain imprisoned for additional 5-year increments. Norway's goal is to successfully reintegrate people back into society. Their hope and commitment is that people are redeemable. If someone is ready to once again be a productive member of society, why should we spend our tax dollars on continuing to punish them? Another standard argument against the Norwegian system is that it would cost way too much money to implement. According to the World Economic Forum, Norway spends between 2 to 4 times more per prisoner than the United States, and many would say that this is too much, especially considering that there are so many needs of law-abiding citizens that our government spending could address. Many would see this as a tax increase that they do not want. If we were to adopt a plan like Norway's, the increased cost for prisoners would be offset in a number of ways. First, shorter prison sentences would save us money. Although we pay more per person, we would be paying that greater amount for a shorter period of time. Second, with a significantly lower recidivism rate, there would be far less crime, which means less people actually going to prison and less money spent on law enforcement and the criminal justice system in general. The fact that Norway has far fewer people in prison per capita proves this point. In Norway, 63 out of 100,000 people are incarcerated. This is a sharp contrast to the 655 per 100,000 in the United States. There are 90% more American citizens incarcerated per capita. Even if adopting these reforms only cuts this number in half, we would actually be saving money. The final argument against adopting a more humane system similar to Norway is that many feel that with more criminals on the street, crime is likely to rise. This is actually not the case. Statistics show that crime rates in Norway are far lower than rates in the United States. After implementing more humane policies, the Norwegian recidivism rate decreased by 28%, making it 20%, which is the lowest in the world. This is evidence that crime will not rise if sentences are reduced and prisoners are treated more humanely. Indeed, crime is actually likely to decrease. Imagine the security that we might experience by considering the title of the BBC production, How Norway Turns Criminals into Good Neighbors. Now that we've considered some of the concerns associated with adopting Norwegian prison policies, let's address what it would look like if these policies were adopted in the United States and steps that you can personally take to support the process. Adopting Norwegian policies when it comes to prison reform will promote public safety, save taxpayer dollars, and lead to a much more humane treatment of prisoners. According to the World Economic Forum, when Norway adopted its policies and adopted a more reform based approach, it worked. Recidivism dropped by a whopping 28%. In the United States, the rate of recidivism is nearly 50%. This means that adopting these policies would most likely lead to a significant decrease in recidivism. We would also likely experience economic benefit because although we would be spending more money on prisoners up front, many costs would be offset by decreased crime and higher post incarceration employment. In addition to committing far less crimes when reintegrated into society, Norwegian inmates are also becoming successful members of society. The most obvious financial benefit of Norway's system of job training, education, and drug treatment is that post incarceration employment increased by 40%. Prisoners would also be much better off with these policies, such as the separation of nonviolent and violent prisoners. Prisoners deemed to be dangerous should be placed in prisons that are far more secure. Another policy that improves living conditions is the one prisoner to a cell policy, which is more comfortable for prisoners as they have personal space, but also increases the safety of all prisoners. We should also advocate for significantly reduced prison terms, with less of an emphasis on punishment and more of an emphasis on rehabilitation. Norway has chosen to give people shorter prison sentences. This is significant as the average sentence in Norway is 6 months, which is a sharp contrast to the over 2 years average sentence in the United States. This means that prison takes far less of a toll on a person's life in Norway than it does in the United States. In Norway, there are no mandatory minimums, so every case is decided based on the specific details of that case. This should also be the practice in the United States. Prisoners should be given access to far more support post release. Norway has implemented a strong and productive program to help the formerly incarcerated reintegrate into society. Aspects of this program include help with finding a job and access to social services. This keeps the formerly incarcerated from falling through the cracks, which they so often do in the US. Programs like this would give ex prisoners a structure to succeed. The incarceration strategies of the United States have proven to be highly unsuccessful in reforming prisoners into productive members of society. It seems we just released the same people as troubled and confused as ever. The only difference being that we made them live in a violent environment for an extended period of time. It is also clear that Norway has adopted a system that works when it comes to reforming prisoners and even makes sense economically. It is my hope that you have been persuaded that the United States should adopt many of the best practices of the Norwegian model. I encourage you to write to your representatives in Congress and advocate for these reforms. The contact information for senators is on the link on the slide. These changes are realistic and possible. Even the very conservative state of North Dakota has already implemented some of these practices, and many other states have been discussing similar changes. We fail our prisoners, our communities, and our country when we do nothing to address a problem which so prominently affects the lives of all of our citizens. Thank you for your attention.
You got the slides in there too?
Yeah, I got the slides. Okay.